Um, so, so I'm recording now. So I'm gonna go over this new interaction stuff. If you guys have questions while I'm recording, just let me know. Um, yeah, we're gonna add some different ways of interacting. We've already used mouse X and mouse Y and mouse pressed, and we also used our DOM elements, the buttons and sliders and things like that, to let the user interact with the sketch. And so now what we're going to do is create our own buttons. And to do this, we're going to use this thing called collision. So we're going to use code to determine if our mouse is inside of a shape. And that's basically what we can use to do a button. And we kind of did a version of this already a few weeks ago when we were talking about functions, but we're going to go over this again. So we're going to go over the circle collision. So this is using the distance function. And oh yeah, we did kind of already go over this. I kind of forgot about that, but we'll just cover it again. And then the second part, we'll go into a little bit more detail. So distance will tell us the distance between 2 points. So we can see here, wherever my line goes, it shows me the distance of that line, whether it's straight um, or at an angle. And it's doing just some basic math there. It's just using the distance, the change in x and the change in y, and using the Pythagorean theorem to get the the overall distance. And so here's a visualization of that. When the distance, when we're looking at a circle, since the radius, the distance between the center and the outside of a circle is always the same. This is an easy way to determine if we're inside of a circle. So creating a button for a circle is pretty easy. We just get the distance between our mouse and the center of the circle. And if that's less than the radius of the circle, then we know we are inside of the circle. And so that's one way that we can create a button. So let's take a look at our example here. So we have a circle in the middle, and if I click on that circle, it changes the color. And if I click outside of the circle, nothing happens. And so that's the basic math for creating that little button there. We did cover that. What was the example where we did that with functions at some point? Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh no, this is just some code. Let's go. Well, we can just do it again. Uh, so I'll do it a little more quickly. So for this one, and we made it a separate button, so let's do that as well. So we can have some like different states for our button. Um, so in this one, uh, we want to create our circle. So let's start with that, and let's start with some variables. We are going to need some variables to know where our circle is. Um, so let's start with variable x, and we can put the circle in the middle of the page, and variable y, we'll also put that in the middle. And let's put a little comment here. Okay, our circle button. And then we need to know the size. So we can say variable s, and let's say it's 100. So now we can draw our circle. So I'll just say circle, and we'll draw it at x, y, and our size. So there's our little circle there. And so if we want to know if we're inside of the button or inside of the circle, we can change the fill. So we can get the distance. So we'll say variable d is the distance between mouse x and mouse y, and then the x and y value of our circle. So this is the x, this is the y, and that determines the middle of the circle. And so if that distance is greater than half the radius, so for this one, or sorry, the radius, which is half the size, so our radius is size divided by 2. And so let's do a fill blue. And else, this means we hover over the circle. We can do a fill is pink. And then let's even do another one. We can say else if mouse is pressed, uh, or actually, let's put this inside here. So we'll say else. So if we're inside the circle, if mouse is pressed. So this is like another state if we're actually clicking. Then we'll do fill is hot pink. And else, if we're inside the circle but we're not clicking, we'll just do pink. So this will give us a few states for our circle. So we can see the regular pink, and then if I click, we get the hot pink. If I click outside of the circle, nothing happens. So we can make the circle do different things, and that's what we'll look at on uh, on Wednesday when we add our slides. But one thing we might want to do is if we're going to have multiple ones of these, we need to have a function. And then we also need to have, we might want to have our logic somewhere else besides the draw, um, uh, besides our draw function. So we can create a function for this. Let's call it button. So I'll say function button and it takes x, y, and size values. And we can basically just copy this all right in there. So I'm just going to grab this whole thing and cut and then paste. And so now, instead of using my variables up here, I'm going to say button, and I can use the same values. So let's say I have 200, 200, and 100. So there is my same button, but now I can add another button. I can say, let's do 200, 300, and 100. So now I have two different buttons that have their own behaviors. And sorry, I guess I'm jumping ahead because we don't really need to do this quite yet. Okay, let's stop there. So this will be good enough for now. Let's go ahead to our rectangle button, and then we'll add some stuff from there as well, since we've already kind of talked about how the circle button works. So that's our circle button. Let's move ahead to our rectangle button because that's what we're actually going to use, although you could use either one when we do our demo on Wednesday. So I'll leave this here and go to a new editor page. Okay, so now what we want to do is a rectangle collision. And so this one is a little bit trickier. Um, we don't have just one size that we're trying to measure. Our rectangle actually has four different conditions that have to be true for our mouse to be inside of the rectangle. So the first condition is that the mouse has to be greater than whatever this left side of the rectangle is. The mouse has to be greater than whatever this top value for y for the rectangle. It has to be less than whatever this right side is, and it has to be less than whatever this bottom is. So we actually have to check four different things to see if our mouse is inside of the rectangle. So it's a little bit trickier, but it's not too much more code. So here we have this example where we're going to add a circle each time I click on the button. So if I click outside of the button, nothing happens. And if I click here, or sorry, this one just changes the color. So we can see the same concept, except now I'm clicking inside the rectangle rather than outside. Um, and uh, so let's code this up and then we'll add some functionality to it. So in this one, we have a rectangle button. And to get started, we're just going to change the color. So I'm going to declare red, green, and blue values. And then I have my normal position and size variables. So I have x, let's do x equals 100 and y equals 100. And for our width, so I'm just using W for width here as a shorthand since P5 uses width for the canvas. So for our width, Let's do 200. And for our height, let's do 100. And then we can draw a rectangle with those dimensions. Okay, so there's our rectangle. And right now, if we click on it or do stuff, nothing's going to happen. So I can change the color by clicking on it. Or what we want to do is change the color by clicking on it. And we're going to put that logic, as I mentioned, in a different place. We're going to put that logic inside of our mouse pressed function, so it only happens once when we press the mouse. So this is kind of similar to what we were just looking at with Michelle's piano piece, where having the piano key, the notes being played, we want to put that inside the key press logic, so it only plays the note once. Whereas our draw function, we want it's going to be drawing all of our graphics. Okay, so uh, for our function, or actually let's set up the color first because otherwise we won't see it when we're done. So let's do fill R, G, and B, and then let's randomize those values. So say R is random 255, G is random 255, and B is random 255. Okay, so now we have a random color, but we're gonna randomize it some more. I'll say no stroke, so we just see the color. So now we're gonna put uh, our collision logic inside of our mouse pressed function. So for this one, we're not using our logic to, highlight the button, although we can do both. But what we want to do is when we press the button, we want something to change. And so that's an event that we want to happen once in time. We don't want that to happen all the time. So we need to set up our parameters. So to start, actually, let's visualize this first, and then we'll go back. Sorry, I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, but um, let's visualize this first so we can go over the parameters, and then we'll set it up. So what I'm going to do just to visualize this is we will have a state for a different fill. So if we're hovering over the rectangle. So we'll say if, and so we're just going to go one condition at a time. So the first condition is mouse is X, that's the position of the mouse. And so we need to know, oh, I didn't even use my right variables here, X, Y, width, and height. Okay, so if mouse X is greater than X, then we know that the mouse is at least to the right of the left side of the rectangle. So let's change the fill here. Let's say it's blue. Okay, so we can see now my mouse when we go from the left side here to the right side here. Okay, so the X position of the mouse is greater than the X value, 100, of the rectangle, then the color changes. So that's good, right? If our mouse is over here in the gray area, it's not on the rectangle. And if it's over here inside the rectangle, then we want to see that it's in the rectangle. So far our logic is good. The problem is if I go up or to the right or down. If I do any of those things, then the color should change back to whatever it started as. So we need a few more conditions. So let's leave this one here. So if we have if mouse Y is greater than Y, then we'll do fill blue. So we'll look at each condition and then we'll bring it back. So now we have this looks right. If I'm up here in this gray area, then we have the default color. And if I move down, then we see blue. So the Y value of the mouse is greater than the Y position of my rectangle. Remember that the rectangle draws from the top left corner, XY. So as soon as I get below this line, we see that highlight. Again, we still have the same problem where, if we go over the sides, we don't see anything. So why don't we put these conditions together? So if I want to put two conditions together, I can use a double ampersand, a compound condition, and I'll put the mouse Y with the mouse X. Let's delete this and let's go. So now it works on two sides, but not to the right or to the bottom. So let's figure out those conditions. These ones are where it gets a little bit trickier. So how do I know what this number is here. Well, I start with x, that's the left side, and then I just add the width. Remember that this whole rectangle, the value of this distance is just the width. It's just this w here. So if I want to know where this is on the canvas, I just have to add x plus w. So I can say if mouse x is less than x plus w, then we'll fill blue. So the reason I'm doing less than here is because I want to make sure it's to the left of the right side of this rectangle. So now if I'm over here, I see the right color. And if I hover back here, now we get the fill blue. So to get this number over here, we have to add the starting position of the rectangle, x, and the width of the rectangle, w. And that gives us this condition over here. So we have one more condition, and it looks very similar, but now we're switching to y. If mouse y is less than y plus height. So it's the same basic idea here. Let's do a fill blue. Same basic idea here. If I'm below, this is confusing because that's the pink we were using before. Okay, here we go. If we're below the rectangle, now we see the highlight turns off. And if we cross this line, we see it turns blue. So that's our final condition. So we take the y, the top of the rectangle, we add the height, and that gives us where the bottom of the rectangle is. So if all four of those things are true, then we know that we're inside the rectangle. So let's put these all together. So let's just, the easiest way to do this, you could put them all in a big line, but with JavaScript, you can add multiple lines. So I'm going to put an ampersand here and then go to the next line. So this is a little bit easier to read. I'll copy this condition and put it here. And then one more ampersand. So we can actually put 3 ampersands together to have 4 different conditions. So now we have 4 total conditions. You could also write it like this if you want, if that's easier to read. With JavaScript, we don't really care about spaces. So that might be a little bit easier to read. You can see each of the conditions. So mouse x has to be greater than x, mouse y has to be greater than y, mouse x has to be less than x plus width, and mouse y has to be less than y plus h. And if all of those things are true, then we get our rectangle highlighting. So we figured out the logic, and we are using the logic now to change the display. But we also want to be able to use the logic to change something else in our project. So we want to do that in mouse press because if we do it inside of draw, then it's going to happen multiple times. So for example, here I'm changing the fill, but let's say I also randomize the fill. So I'm going to copy these randoms and put them here. Now if I do this, it's constantly changing the color of the fill because its draw is running. And if we are changing the color every time we go through draw, we're going to see all these random colors. So we don't want to randomize the color every time we go into here. We want to do it only when we click on the mouse. So what I can do is just copy all of my logic and paste it into mouse pressed, and I'll get rid of this fill here. I'll get rid of these guys here. And so the logic looks exactly the same, but since it's in mouse pressed, this only happens when we press the mouse. So now I still have the highlight, but if I click, it's going to change the color. So maybe we want to get rid of the highlight actually. Or actually, let's just add another condition. We can add another condition here, mouse is pressed. So we'll only see the highlight when we click, and then when we release, we'll see the new color. So by putting something in mouse pressed or key pressed or another event like that, then it doesn't happen constantly. It only happens when that event occurs. So we can do something once and use the button to change something about our project. We could also, leave the button and change the background. I could put our BG here, and then let's just fill pink here. So now each time I click the button, we change the background color, and it's just randomized, but you could do anything you want. You could change the state of your project. You could, flip Booleans on and off. You could do lots of different things. So we'll look at how to use it a little bit more on Wednesday, but this is the basic setup for the button. So we have our drawing logic here, and then our sort of button press logic here. Um, so let me put a little comment here. Detect if mouse inside button. And same here. And yeah, this looks good. So I'm going to stop the recording here and then I'll see if there's any questions. And I'll put these sketches into the voice chat as well.